Jack Harmon trudged up the final stretch of overgrown path, his boots crunching through the thin layer of early autumn frost. The familiar silhouette of his grandfather's cabin emerged between the pines, looking exactly as it had when he'd left 8 months ago for his last deployment. Somehow, he'd expected it to change. He certainly had. The cabin's weathered logs seemed to welcome him as he approached, though the squirrels chattering angrily from nearby branches clearly considered him an intruder. Jack allowed himself a small smile, the first in months. Out here, 40 miles from the nearest paved road, he was finally just another animal in the wilderness. Not Captain Harmon, not the sole survivor of Operation Blackfish. Just a man with a backpack and too many memories. "Home sweet home," he muttered, fishing the old iron key from his pocket. The door swung open with a familiar creak, revealing the simple interior. Stone fireplace, handcrafted furniture, walls lined with his grandfather's books on astronomy and wilderness survival. Everything covered in a fine layer of dust. Everything exactly where it should be. That first night, Jack lit the wood stove, ate a simple meal of canned stew, and fell into a dreamless sleep for the first time since the hospital. The mountain silence worked better than any sedative the military doctors had prescribed. On the third day, he noticed something odd. The coffee tin wasn't where he'd left it. Jack stood in the center of the one-room cabin, frowning. He lived alone, had always been meticulously organized, a habit that had saved his life more than once in the field. The tin should have been beside the cast iron skillet. Instead, it sat neatly next to his grandfather's dog-eared copy of Practical Astronomy *. "Getting sloppy," he murmured, returning it to its proper place. But the next morning, his hunting knife had migrated from its sheath by the door to the small table near the window. The morning after that, he found his collection of topographical maps rearranged, with the local mountain range map placed deliberately on top. Jack began marking the positions of objects before sleeping, using an old military technique, tiny threads placed across doorways, a dusting of flour near the windows. Each morning, the threads remained undisturbed, the flour unmarked, yet objects continued their mysterious migrations around the cabin. On the 7th night, a peculiar blue light woke him. Through half-closed eyes, Jack observed what looked like faint luminescence moving near his bookshelf. When he shifted in bed, the light instantly vanished. Heart pounding, he switched on his flashlight, sweeping it across the empty cabin. Nothing seemed disturbed, yet the air carried a strange metallic scent, like ozone after lightning. The next morning, he discovered delicate, impossibly perfect circles etched into the wooden table. They formed a pattern that, after some study, Jack recognized as a simplified map of the solar system, with Earth's position marked by a deeper indentation. That afternoon, he drove to town and purchased 4 motion-activated cameras. "Having beer problems?" asked the shopkeeper. Jack nodded, not meeting the man's eyes. "Something's been getting into my place. I aim to find out what." He positioned the cameras strategically throughout the cabin, one facing the door, one watching the windows, one directed at the kitchen area, and the last pointed toward his bed. Whatever was moving through his cabin at night, he would catch it. 3 days later, reviewing the footage in the blue glow of his laptop, Jack's coffee mug slipped from suddenly numb fingers, shattering against the floor. There, captured in stark infrared, was a slender figure with 6-fingered hands, examining his military medals with unmistakable curiosity. And nothing in his training had prepared him for what those hands were doing to his grandfather's astronomy books. Maya jerked awake in her quarters, heart hammering against her ribs. The strange dream clung to her consciousness, vast structures, of impossible geometry floating in space, mathematical equations that shifted and evolved as she observed them. She pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to clear the lingering images. "Lieutenant Chen, report to engineering," the ship's A announced, its voice oddly melodic compared to its usual monotone. 3 days had passed since their narrow escape from the Xenovori attack. 3 days of uneasy glances from the surviving crew. They hadn't decided if she was a hero or if her unorthodox methods had invited disaster. Maya swung her legs over the edge of her bunk and noticed her terminal screen glowing with complex schematics she didn't remember accessing. The screen cleared itself the moment she focused on it. "Strange," she muttered, pulling on her uniform. The sleeve caught on her wrist, revealing the fine tracery of scars from electrical burns sustained during the attack. Wounds that should have taken weeks to heal were already fading to silver. In engineering, acting Captain Mercer waited with a grim expression. "We're limping to the mining colony on Deimos IV. Our long-range communications are shot, and we've lost contact with the rest of the fleet." "How long until we reach the colony?" Maya asked, already assessing the damage reports scrolling across nearby screens. 18 hours, if the engines hold," Mercer replied. "I need you to keep them functioning until we arrive." As Maya worked through her shift, she noticed the ship's systems anticipating her needs. Diagnostic tools appeared on screens before she requested them. Power rerouted to her location as she moved through the vessel. When she attempted to document these anomalies, the logs mysteriously deleted themselves. That night, the dreams intensified. Symbols floated through her subconscious, not quite letters or numbers, but something between mathematics and music. She understood them perfectly within the dream, but upon waking, they slipped from her grasp like water. The Intrepid docked at Deimos IV the following day, the small mining colony their only hope for critical repairs. Maya supervised the offloading of damaged components when a silent alarm pulsed against her consciousness. She froze, somehow knowing the exact nature of the threat before the official alert sounded. "Xenovori infiltrators detected in Cargo Bay 3, the ship's A announced, as security teams scrambled to respond." Maya found herself running toward the danger rather than away from it. 2 engineering technicians lay injured outside the sealed cargo bay doors. Inside, she could sense the infiltrators moving with lethal purpose toward the ship's central processing core. Without conscious thought, she pressed her palm against the access panel. Electricity seemed to flow from the ship into her body and back again in a perfect circuit. Every defense system aboard the Intrepid activated simultaneously, not just security protocols, but environmental controls, maintenance routines, even food preparation units. They worked in harmonious coordination, herding the infiltrators into containment fields that shouldn't have been possible given the ship's damaged state. "How did you do that?" whispered one of the injured technicians, staring at Maya with a mixture of fear and awe. Before she could respond, a weathered hand gripped her arm. Maya turned to find an elderly colonist, his eyes wide with recognition. "You must come with me now," he said urgently, "before they send more hunters." He led her through the colony's winding corridors to an ancient lift hidden behind maintenance panels. They descended in silence until reaching a vast chamber carved directly into the planetoid's bedrock. The walls were covered in primitive drawings illuminated by bioluminescent fungi. Maya gasped as she recognized the symbols from her dreams etched into the stone. The illustrations showed human-like figures surrounded by concentric circles of light, commanding massive machines and cosmic forces. The Starwalkers called them world shapers, the elder explained, his voice reverent. They came across galaxies to study them, the humans who could speak to machines as if they were flesh of their flesh. His knurled finger traced a central figure on the wall, a human woman with radiating lines emerging from her head, standing before kneeling alien forms. "The queens of metal and mind," he whispered. "We've waited generations for the bloodline to resurface." Over the next 2 weeks, Jack developed a rudimentary communication system with Celine. Each morning, he would find her responses to questions he'd left the night before, written in increasingly fluent English. Her handwriting evolved daily, shifting from awkwardly precise letters to flowing script that mimicked the field notes in his grandfather's journals. "How do you learn our language so quickly?" Jack wrote one evening. The next morning, her reply waited. "Pattern recognition neural structures different from humans. Your brain separates language and mathematics. Mine does not. All communication is mathematical to my species." Jack began leaving simple objects beside his notes: a compass, a thermometer, a solar-powered calculator. Each item disappeared overnight and returned before dawn, accompanied by detailed observations. The calculator particularly fascinated her, generating 12 pages of notes comparing its primitive binary processing to something she called quantum probability matrices. Jack found himself anticipating their exchanges with growing eagerness. 23 days after first contact, he left his most direct question yet. "Why are you here? Why my cabin?" The answer he found stunned him. Atmospheric entry emergency. Research vessel suffered catastrophic shield failure. Earth's magnetic field properties unexpected, disruptive to both our technology and biological systems. Your cabin, selected specifically after orbital surveillance, identified occupant with wilderness survival training, military background suggesting adaptive response capabilities, and psychological profile indicating potential receptivity to non-terrestrial contact. Jack read the note 3 times, a chill running through him. "You were watching me before you crashed. Not you specifically. All military installations and personnel. Standard protocol for assessment of developing worlds. Your psychological evaluation after Operation Blackfish indicated unusually high adaptability to extreme situations. You were classified as an optimal contact candidate if emergency interaction became necessary." The implications hit Jack like a physical blow. His military records, his psychiatric evaluations after the failed operation. They'd been monitoring everything. "How long have your people been watching Earth?" He wrote with a shaking hand. He had to wait until the following morning for her response. Continuous observation for 12,000 Earth years. Periodic observation for approximately 150,000 years prior. First research outpost established during your species' early agricultural development. Earth classified as high potential/high risk emerging civilization. That evening, Jack left a flashlight with a note. "I want to meet you directly. Turn this on if you're willing to talk face to face." When he woke at dawn, the flashlight was gone. A new note replaced it. Direct interaction poses significant risks. Earth's electromagnetic field disrupts my biological camouflage systems and communication technology. Currently vulnerable. However, preliminary assessment of your intentions suggests acceptable risk parameters. We'll initiate direct contact tonight at moonrise, 21:47 hours. Please remain seated and motionless during initial approach. Jack spent the day in a state of nervous anticipation, cleaning the cabin, setting out extra chairs, even shaving his 2-week beard. As the appointed time approached, he positioned himself in his grandfather's rocking chair, hands visible on the armrests as instructed. The cabin door opened precisely at 21:47. Celine stepped inside, her luminescent skin pulsing with waves of blue and violet. She stood nearly 7 feet tall, her proportions almost human, but stretched to elegant, impossible thinness. Those 6-fingered hands folded formally across her chest in what Jack somehow knew was a gesture of greeting. "Hello, Jack Harmon," she said, her voice like wind through crystal. "Thank you for not being afraid." 3 days after their first face-to-face meeting, Jack awoke to the distant thrum of helicopter rotors. He bolted upright, military instincts instantly alert. Celine was already at the window, her slender form silhouetted against the dawn light, skin shifted to match the cabin's wooden interior. 3 aircraft approaching from the southeast, she said, her English now flawlessly precise if oddly cadenced. Military-grade thermal imaging active. Jack joined her at the window, careful not to touch her. She'd explained that direct contact could cause her discomfort due to humans' electromagnetic signature. Through his binoculars, he spotted the unmarked black helicopters sweeping the valley below in a standard search pattern. "How did they find us?" he muttered. "They haven't. Yet." Celine's pupils contracted to perfect squares. "But they're using detection equipment tuned to trace anomalous energy signatures. My escape pod emits a specific radiation at regular intervals." Jack lowered the binoculars. "You didn't mention an escape pod. I didn't trust you with that information initially." Her skin rippled with apologetic blue patterns. "It's located 3 kilometers north, concealed in a ravine. Its communication array remains partially functional. My only hope of contacting my research vessel." A sharp knock at the cabin door froze them both. Celine vanished, literally disappeared before Jack's eyes, leaving only a faint shimmer in the air near his bookshelf. Jack composed himself and opened the door to find a man in forest ranger clothing that fit too perfectly, sunglasses despite the cloudy day, and a too rigid posture that screamed military to Jack's trained eye. "Morning, sir. Ranger Dawson." The man flashed a badge too quickly to examine. "We're conducting routine checks after reports of unusual weather phenomena in the area. Mind if I ask a few questions?" Jack leaned casually against the doorframe, blocking the view inside. "Weather phenomena. Electrical disturbances. Unusual lights. Anything strange in the past few weeks?" "Just the usual mountain weather," Jack shrugged. "Been pretty quiet up here." The ranger nodded, his eyes scanning past Jack into the cabin. "Living alone out here?" "Just me and the chipmunks." "Mind if I come in? Need signatures for the report." Jack hesitated just long enough to seem natural. "Place is a mess. Why don't I step out?" He closed the door behind him and followed the man to a clipboard on the hood of a government-issue SUV with civilian plates. As he pretended to read the form, Jack spotted communication equipment inside the vehicle. Advanced military grade, not Forest Service standard. "Lot of resources for checking on some strange lights," Jack commented, signing with a deliberately messy scroll. "Can't be too careful these days." The man smiled thinly. "We'll be conducting operations in the area for the next few days. Might hear some activity, nothing to worry about." After the man left, Jack waited 15 minutes before speaking to the seemingly empty cabin. "They're from Threshold Security. Private military contractors I worked with overseas. They don't do routine checks." Celine shimmered back into visibility. "They detected my pod's energy signature. The containment field is failing." Her luminescence dimmed anxiously. "If they find it, they'll trace it back here. And if they discover me." "They won't," Jack interrupted, already pulling his topographical maps from the shelf. But we need to move that pod immediately." Celine's expression shifted to something approximating surprise. "You're going to help me?" Jack checked his hunting rifle and began packing supplies. "Let's just say I've never much liked Threshold's methods. And I'm not about to let them get their hands on someone who's travelled across the stars." As if on cue, another helicopter roared overhead, lower this time. "We have approximately 6 hours before they triangulate the exact location," Celine said. Jack nodded grimly, shouldering his pack. "Then we'd better move fast." Jack and Celine reached the ravine just as the afternoon sunlight began to fade behind the mountains. The terrain had grown increasingly difficult, forcing them to navigate steep slopes and dense underbrush. Though Jack considered himself in excellent physical condition, he struggled to keep pace with Celine, who moved across the landscape with effortless grace despite her height. "It's here," she said, stopping abruptly at what appeared to be a solid rock face covered in moss and lichen. Jack saw nothing unusual until Celine passed her 6-fingered hand over a particular pattern in the stone. The air shimmered, and suddenly a metallic object appeared before them, roughly the size of a small car, but shaped like nothing Jack had ever seen. Its surface seemed to both absorb and reflect light simultaneously, creating an effect that made his eyes water when he tried to focus on it. "Camouflage field still partially functional," Celine explained, touching a sequence of points on the smooth exterior. A seam appeared, widening into an entrance. "Quickly. Threshold's scanning equipment will detect the field disruption." Inside, the pod was surprisingly spacious, with contoured surfaces that flowed organically rather than the angular construction Jack had expected. No visible controls or screens, just a central pedestal with what looked like liquid metal pooled on its surface. Celine placed her hand in the liquid, which immediately rose up to envelop her fingers. The interior illuminated with holographic displays that filled the air around them. "The pod's quantum communication array is damaged but operational," she said, manipulating the strange symbols floating before her. "I can show you why I'm here while I transfer essential data." The holographic display shifted, showing a breathtaking view of a star system with 2 suns, one blue, one orange, surrounded by 7 planets of varying sizes. "My home," Celine said softly. 12 light years from Earth." The image zoomed to the 3rd planet, showing sprawling cities unlike any human architecture, structures that seemed to grow from the landscape rather than being built upon it. Beings similar to Celine moved through these spaces, some flying with what appeared to be natural bioluminescent propulsion. "We've been observing Earth for millennia," she continued as the display shifted to show historical human civilizations from a perspective that made Jack dizzy. Aerial views of ancient Rome, medieval Europe, and modern cities, all captured with impossible clarity. "Your species presents a unique paradox in our studies." "How so?" Jack asked, transfixed by the images. "Most intelligent species follow predictable evolutionary and technological trajectories. Humans don't." The display showed military conflicts throughout history, then switched to scenes of remarkable human compassion and creativity. "Your kind embraces contradictions that most species find incompatible. You're simultaneously more destructive and more creative than any species we've encountered." Jack watched as the display showed human technological advancement compressed into a timeline. "Is that why Threshold can't find your ship? Your technology is that advanced?" "No," Celine replied, her skin darkening to a deep blue. "They can't find my research vessel because it no longer exists. When our shields failed during atmospheric entry, my team jettisoned all escape pods. I am the only survivor." A distant sound of helicopter rotors interrupted them. Celine's hands moved rapidly through the holographic interface. "We have very little time," she said urgently. "This pod contains knowledge your species isn't ready for, if Threshold obtains it." "They'll weaponize it," Jack finished, the reality of the situation crystallizing in his mind. "What do we need to do?" Celine's large eyes fixed on him. "Help me move what we can, then destroy everything else." Working with urgent precision, Jack and Celine stripped the escape pod of its essential components. Celine removed several crystal-like data cores and a small device she described as a quantum entanglement communicator. Jack carried what looked like metallic spheres that felt unnervingly warm to the touch. "What exactly is your plan for destroying this?" Jack asked, eyeing the pod's substantial remains. "The emergency protocol includes a molecular destabilization sequence," Celine replied, her fingers dancing across the fluid control panel. "It will reduce the pod to base elements, mostly carbon and silicon. Nothing recognizably technological will remain." The sound of rotors grew louder, accompanied now by voices and the crackle of radio communications. Threshold forces were spreading throughout the forest, methodically closing in on their position. "How long will the destabilization take?" Jack asked, checking the ammunition in his rifle, a futile gesture against what was likely a full tactical team. 17 minutes. We need to be at least half a kilometer away when it completes." Celine's skin pulsed with anxious patterns of red and orange. The process releases a significant electromagnetic pulse. Jack nodded, shouldering the backpack now filled with alien technology. "Let's move." They slipped away from the ravine, using the deepening shadows as cover. Jack led them through a game trail almost invisible to the untrained eye, moving deeper into the wilderness. Behind them, the Threshold search teams converged on the ravine, their voices carrying through the still mountain air. "We need to split up," Jack said when they reached a small stream. "They're looking for unusual energy signatures. You're basically a walking beacon with those components." Celine studied him with those geometric pupils. "You want me to give you the technology?" "I'll draw them off. You head north to the old mining caves. They are lined with enough minerals to mask any signatures. I marked them on your map." "And if Threshold captures you?" Jack smiled grimly. "I've been interrogated by experts. Besides, they're former colleagues. They'll want to talk before they do anything permanent." A brilliant flash of light suddenly illuminated the forest behind them. The pod's destabilization had triggered prematurely. Seconds later, a concussive wave of energy washed over them, momentarily disrupting Jack's vision. "Something's wrong," Celine whispered, her voice tense. "That shouldn't have." The communicator at her waist emitted a series of harmonic tones. Her long fingers trembled as she raised it. "Impossible." "What is it?" "A response from my people." Our eyes widened. "A retrieval vessel has been dispatched. Arrival estimated in 16 hours. Jack felt a complex mix of emotions, relief tinged with unexpected sadness. "That's good, right? You're going home." "Not just retrieval," Celine continued, her voice hollow. "Standard protocol for technology exposure on developing worlds. Full containment procedures authorized." "Meaning what, exactly?" "Meaning they will eliminate all evidence of contact." Her luminescent eyes fixed on him. "Including any humans with knowledge of our existence." In the distance, shouts of excitement rose from the Threshold teams discovering the remains of the pod. They had perhaps minutes before the search expanded in their direction. "How many people are we talking about?" Jack asked, his military mind already calculating scenarios. The retrieval ship carries a specialized containment team. They will target anyone demonstrating knowledge of our technology. Threshold. You. She hesitated. Potentially the surrounding population centers if contamination is deemed extensive. Jack took a deep breath, his decision crystallizing with cold clarity. Then we have 16 hours to come up with a better plan. What alternative exists? Celine asked. I don't know yet, Jack admitted. But I'm not letting either side start killing people over this. There has to be another way. For the first time since he'd met her, Celine's expression showed something remarkably human, hope mixed with uncertainty. This is why your species confounds our predictions. Dawn broke over the mountains as Jack put the finishing touches on his improvised workstation inside the mining cave. They'd spent the night evading threshold patrols while gathering components from Jack's cabin and the scattered remains of Celine's pod. Now, surrounded by a bizarre combination of alien technology and human electronics, Jack worked with intense focus, connecting his grandfather's ham radio to Celine's quantum communicator. Your plan violates 17 different contact protocols, Celine observed, her skin cycling through concerned purples and blues. My people have strict rules about technological transfer to developing worlds. Good thing I'm not asking permission, Jack replied, carefully soldering a connection between a crystal data core and his laptop. How much time until your retrieval ship arrives? 4 hours, 23 minutes. Celine's long fingers manipulated holographic symbols floating above one of her devices. Threshold has established a perimeter around the mountain. Approximately 37 operatives, using standard containment tactics. Jack nodded grimly. They're waiting for reinforcements. Once your ship arrives, all hell breaks loose. He sat back, wiping sweat from his brow. This might actually work. Explain again what you hope to accomplish, Celine said, genuine curiosity in her voice. Your people are coming to eliminate evidence of contact, right? And Threshold wants your technology. Jack gestured to their cobbled-together creation. So we give the evidence to everyone simultaneously. No more secrets to contain. The device before them looked almost comical. Alien crystalline structures attached to a weathered ham radio, connected to a satellite phone and laptop. Jack had explained that it would amplify Celine's communication array through existing Earth satellite networks, broadcasting a signal globally. The containment protocol exists because most species react with fear or violence to evidence of advanced civilizations, Celine countered. The resulting chaos is exactly why we're not sending technical specifications, Jack interrupted. Just proof of your existence, your peaceful intentions, and a warning about Threshold's activities. Too much information in too many hands for anyone to control the narrative. Celine studied him with those geometrically perfect pupils. This solution never appeared in any of our predictive models for first contact scenarios. That's why it'll work. Jack connected the final wire. Your people won't need containment if everyone already knows you exist. And Threshold can't weaponize technology that's being monitored by the entire world. He glanced at his watch. We broadcast in 30 minutes. That gives us time to record your message. Jack handed Celine a small camera. Keep it simple. Tell Earth who you are, why you're here, and that more of your people are coming peacefully. Celine's skin flickered with uncertain patterns. My superiors will consider this catastrophic mission failure. But they won't kill innocent people, will they? After a long moment, Celine's colour stabilized to a resolute blue. No, despite protocols, they are not executioners. They will adapt. She took the camera with surprising gentleness. "Your solution is uniquely human, bypassing the problem entirely rather than solving it conventionally." Jack smiled. "Sometimes the best way through a wall is around it." As Celine prepared to record humanity's first official extraterrestrial greeting, Jack heard vehicles approaching outside. Threshold had found them. "Hurry," he whispered, readying his rifle. "I'll buy us time. The world needs to hear what you have to say before either of our species does something we'll all regret." Celine's eyes met his with newfound respect. "I begin to understand why my people find humans so fascinating and so terrifying." The world changed at 9:47 a.m. Mountain Time. Jack crouched at the cave entrance, rifle ready but unfired. He didn't want to hurt former colleagues, just delay them. Smoke grenades had bought precious minutes, confusing the Threshold operatives advancing through the forest. Inside the cave, Celine completed her broadcast, her melodic voice carrying humanity's first official extraterrestrial greeting to every connected device on the planet. Within minutes, social media exploded. News helicopters diverted from their regular routes, heading toward the coordinates embedded in Celine's message. Military channels buzzed with confused orders and counter-orders as command structures struggled to respond to an unprecedented situation. "It's done," Celine said, joining Jack at the cave entrance. Her skin shimmered with what he now recognized as nervous anticipation. "All major communication networks are carrying the signal. Your internet is efficient at spreading information." Jack nodded, watching Threshold forces retreating to defensive positions as the first news helicopters appeared on the horizon. "They're backing off. Too many witnesses now." Above them, a disturbance rippled through the clouds, a circular pattern of atmospheric displacement growing larger by the second. Celine's retrieval vessel arriving ahead of schedule. "My superiors monitored the broadcast," Celine explained, her voice tinged with wonder. "They're adapting protocols in real time. This is unprecedented." The massive ship that emerged from the clouds defied conventional aerodynamics, hovering silently above the mountain forest. Its surface reflected the surroundings like a perfect mirror, making its true shape difficult to perceive. Smaller craft detached from its underside, descending toward the growing crowd of human observers. Jack's satellite phone rang. The caller ID showed a Washington, D.C. area code. "Harmon," he answered tersely. "Captain Harmon." The voice belonged to his former commanding officer. "The Joint Chiefs are scrambling. The President's being briefed. What the hell did you do?" "Introduced two species that were destined to meet eventually," Jack replied, watching as the first of Celine's people touched down in a clearing half a mile away. "I'd suggest sending diplomatic representatives rather than tactical teams." 3 hours later, the mountainside had transformed into an impromptu first contact site. Military cordons kept the growing crowd of civilians and press at a respectful distance, while hastily assembled diplomatic teams engaged with Celine's people. Jack stood apart from the chaos, observing from the porch of his cabin. Celine approached, now dressed in the formal attire of her people, a fluid-like garment that shifted colors with her movements. "My superiors wish to speak with you," she said. "They're having difficulty processing how a single human civilian altered generations of contact protocols in less than a day." Jack smiled tiredly. "Tell them I just applied some human common sense to the problem." "They're designating you as Earth's first official liaison," Celine continued. "If you're willing." Jack looked around at his cabin, the quiet sanctuary he'd sought for healing now at the center of humanity's greatest adventure. "Will your people still hide when they see us coming?" he asked. Celine's skin rippled with what he now recognized as amusement. Not anymore. Your solution forces both our species into the light. She extended her 6-fingered hand, a gesture she'd never offered before. My people have much to learn about humans, it seems. Jack took her hand carefully, feeling the strange texture of her skin against his. And we have a universe to discover. Around them, the future of 2 species began to unfold beneath the ancient mountain pines, all because an alien woman had once hidden in a human's cabin, but chose, finally, to be seen.